After nearly 8 long years of a brutal, bloody war, one of the 20th century's biggest conflicts over decolonization finally came to an end. But not on the battlefield, it ended at the negotiating table. Today, we're diving deep into the story of the Evian Accords, the agreement that literally forged an independent Algeria. But here's the big question that really hangs over this entire moment in history, right? Was Algeria's independence some sort of gift, graciously handed over by France, or was it a victory that was seized, inch by hard-fought inch, through sheer political grit and will? Well, in this explainer, we're going to look at it through the eyes of one of the key negotiators, Ben Youssef Ben Keita, who makes a powerful case for the latter. You see, the end of the shooting war, that was really just the beginning of a whole new kind of combat. This battle of negotiations was just as critical, maybe even more so. It was this high-stakes showdown where the entire future of a nation was going to be decided. Because, the other side could use this process to divide, to demoralize, and ultimately to snatch back everything that was won on the battlefield. Now, to really understand why these talks were so incredibly tense, we first have to get a handle on the nature of the war itself. Because this wasn't just any old colonial conflict. The thing is, Algeria was a settler colony. For over 100 years, France hadn't just treated it like a possession, they treated it like an actual part of France. You had 1 million European settlers living there, deeply rooted in the land. So for France, this wasn't like giving up some distant trading post. It felt more like amputating a limb. And that's exactly why the war was so long and so unbelievably vicious. Okay, so this brings us to the very first massive hurdle in the whole peace process. Before they could even start talking about the terms of peace, they had to fight over who even had the right to be at the table in the first place. And just look at the massive gap between the two sides here. I mean, it's night and day. On one side, you have France, led by Charles de Gaulle, pushing for a round table. He wanted to invite all these different Algerian groups. This was a classic divide and conquer strategy, right? A way to weaken the opposition. And they were also dangling the threat of just carving up the country. But for Algeria's National Liberation Front, the FLN, their position was absolute. Nope. They, and only they, represented the Algerian people. And they were fighting for one unified and fully independent nation, period. In fact, the Algerian delegation's entire strategy was built on these 4 non-negotiable pillars. You could call them their red lines. First, territorial integrity, and that absolutely included the Sahara. Second, the unity of the Algerian people as a single nation. Third, full uncompromised sovereignty. And fourth, the recognition of the FLN as the one and only party to negotiate with. Giving up ground on any one of these was, to them, a betrayal of the entire revolution. And of those 4 pillars, it was 2 of them that would become the biggest sticking points. I mean, these 2 issues stalled negotiations for years and brought the talks to the brink of total collapse time and time again. So you have to ask, why? Why was this vast, seemingly empty desert so incredibly important? What made the Sahara the absolute heart of this entire dispute? Well, the stakes were just enormous. The Sahara had immense, newly discovered oil and gas reserves. It was also where France was conducting its secret nuclear weapons tests. And on top of all that, it was a strategic gateway to the rest of Africa. So for France, separating the Sahara from a future Algeria wasn't just some negotiating tactic. It was a core strategic and economic goal. And this number really puts it all into perspective. We are talking about an investment of around 700 billion old francs. That's a staggering amount of money. This wasn't just a political disagreement. This was a fight over a massive economic prize that France felt it had created and had every right to keep. So this is where it gets really tricky, because both sides were using the exact same words, self-determination, but they meant completely different things. De Gaulle's version was basically a rigged choice. You can have some limited autonomy under our thumb, or you can have a full break, but we get to carve off the Sahara and other valuable parts of the country for ourselves. The FLN's version, on the other hand, was simple, a referendum on total independence for a united Algeria, Sahara included. But, and this is key, only after all the political and military terms were already hammered out and agreed upon. So with the 2 sides stuck in a complete deadlock, how on earth did they ever get to an agreement? Well, let me tell you, the path to get there was long and it was absolutely littered with failures. So the first talks in 1960 failed miserably because France just refused to treat the Algerian delegates as equals. They treated them like rebels who were there to surrender. But then we get a major turning point. Massive popular demonstrations exploded across Algeria. This showed France that the people were united behind the FLN. The first official talks at Evian in 61 stalled over the Sahara. The next round collapsed completely. It actually wasn't until March of 1962, after a whole series of secret back-channel meetings, that a final deal was finally struck. And as Ben Ketta points out right here, those popular uprisings were the real game changer. They were the one thing de Gaulle just couldn't ignore. They proved to the entire world that the FLN wasn't just some small group of fighters, they were the voice of a nation. And a military solution was simply off the table. This, of course, dramatically strengthened the Algerian hand in the negotiation. So after all that struggle, what did the final agreement actually say? Well, this is where the Algerians believed they achieved a total, comprehensive victory. Remember those 4 pillars we talked about? Well, the Accords delivered on every single one. Algeria would be a fully sovereign state, not some puppet. The Sahara was officially recognized as part of Algeria. That was a massive win. The threat of partitioning the country was dead. And by signing the deal, France was, in effect, recognizing the FLN as the legitimate representative of the Algerian people. Check, 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 and check. And to really get how rare this outcome was, you just have to look at other decolonization struggles. Take Ireland. They fought for independence, but ended up with their country partitioned. Or Vietnam. They won their war against France, only to be divided, which led to another, even more devastating war. But Algeria, by holding firm on its principles, managed to avoid that fate, securing both its sovereignty and its unity. And this final point here just shows incredible foresight. The Algerian delegation refused to grant automatic dual citizenship to the European settlers. Why? Because they understood this could create a sort of two-headed state with a privileged minority that could be used by outside powers, leading to permanent internal conflict down the road. It was a really tough decision, but one they felt was absolutely essential to create a truly unified nation for generations to come. And you know, that really leaves us with a final thought. The Evian Accords weren't the end of the story. They were the beginning of a brand new one. So the question remains, when a nation's sovereignty is won through such an intense struggle, when it's not given but seized, what does that really mean for its future? And how does that kind of origin story shape its identity on the world stage?